They thought they could strike silence and move on, business as usual. But what happened next was not in their control. When Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz, the world didn't just lose access to oil, it lost its illusion of dominance. In that moment, the balance of power trembled. Headlines exploded, and behind every political scramble was one undeniable truth. The Muslim world is no longer asleep. This is just a story about strategy. It's a story about dignity, resistance, and the awakening of a people who've been silent for too long. Stay with me till the very end, because what you're about to hear may just change how you see. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a narrow body of water between Iran and Oman. It is one of the most strategic choke points on Earth. Every day, nearly 20 million barrels of oil flow through this passage, fueling industries, economies, and nations across the globe. It is the lifeline for much of the world's energy needs, especially for the Western powers and their allies who rely on Middle Eastern oil to sustain their comfort and control. For decades, this narrow stretch of sea has been treated like a silent servant, expected to deliver without question, without fail. But behind that silence stood a nation, Iran, watching, waiting, and reminding the world that control over such a crucial artery was never guaranteed. When Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz, it wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a global shockwave. Ships froze in place, oil prices soared, and headlines screamed of chaos. But what many failed to understand was the deeper message. This wasn't merely about trade or tanks. It was about sovereignty. It was a reminder that Iran is not a passive observer in the theater of world politics. It is a key player holding one of the most powerful cards in modern geopolitics. By controlling the straits, Iran controls not just oil, but leverage. The ability to disrupt the flow of comfort to powerful nations is no small thing. And when that comfort is threatened, true fear begins to surface. Western powers have long operated under the assumption that dominance gives them the right to dictate terms, to impose sanctions, to engineer regime change, to starve economies into submission. But they forgot that the very oil fueling their ambitions passes through waters Iran calls home. When Iran moved to close those waters, it wasn't seeking war. It was reclaiming the forgotten truth that even giants can be humbled. It was showing that geography, resilience, and determination still hold power in a world obsessed with drones and diplomacy. The reaction from the world revealed everything. Panic didn't come from missiles. It came from the realization that a single decision by one Muslim nation could cause financial tremors in New York, London, and Tokyo. That a supposed isolated country could tighten the world's throat without firing a shot. And for Muslims around the world, this act carried weight far beyond oil. It was a moment of recognition, a signal that the global balance of power isn't as one-sided as it seems, that dignity, when defended with strategy and strength, can still shake the earth beneath empires. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement is not made in words, but in silence, sealed by a closed strait, and a world suddenly forced to pay attention. Iran's decision to shut down the Strait of Hormuz did not come from impulse or desperation. It came from a place of patience stretched beyond its limit. For years, Iran has endured economic sanctions that have strangled its economy, witnessed its scientists assassinated in cold blood, seen foreign powers orchestrate cyber attacks against its infrastructure. and watched as allies and neighbors were bombed, occupied, and abandoned. Through all of it, Iran did not react with reckless aggression. It held its ground, endured the storm, and gave the world time to act with fairness and reason. But the silence from the so-called champions of justice grew louder, and the hypocrisy of global diplomacy more visible. Shutting the strait was not a random act. It was a declaration. Enough is enough. The West often views such actions through the lens of provocation, as if Iran suddenly woke up and decided to choke the world's oil supply. But that's not what happened. This move was a response to years of injustice dressed as international policy. It was a response to deals made in bad faith, treaties violated without consequence, and negotiations that served only to buy time while increasing pressure. It was Iran refusing to play the game anymore, refusing to sit at a table where the rules were written to ensure its loss. And so it did what no one expected. It flipped the board over. In that one act, Iran reclaimed the narrative. For the first time in years, it was not responding to sanctions. It was setting its own terms. Not reacting to pressure, it was creating it. The Strait of Hormuz became more than a waterway. It became a symbol of sovereignty. It said to the world, you cannot strangle a nation and expect it to smile. You cannot punish a people and expect their silence. You cannot rob a country of its dignity and expect no resistance. Iran reminded the world that self-respect is not measured by military strength alone, but by the courage to say no when enough is truly enough. This move was not designed to start a war. It was designed to demand attention. It forced world leaders to look beyond their talking points, beyond their comfortable assumptions, and confront the consequences of their double standards. It made clear that Iran's patience had a limit, and that limit had been reached. For Muslim audiences around the world, it was not just a headline. It was a cry that echoed every wound left by occupation, betrayal, and manipulation. It was a statement that in this world, if you do not assert your own worth, no one else will. And Iran in that moment didn't just shut us straight. It opened a chapter of unapologetic resistance that the world could no longer ignore. The Muslim world has often found itself fragmented, not just by geography, but by politics, alliances, and fear. For decades, Western influence has shaped the direction and decisions of many Muslim majority countries, often forcing them into silence, even when injustice stared them in the face. Economic dependencies, diplomatic pressures, and military threats have made unity seem like a distant dream, too risky to pursue and too fragile to sustain. But when Iran took the bold step of shutting the Strait of Hormuz, something shifted across the Muslim world. This act, rooted in defiance and dignity, wasn't just about defending national interests. It sent a powerful message to every Muslim nation. Courage is possible and submission is not the only path. This singular move was not just Iran standing up to a superpower. It was Iran standing for the idea that a Muslim nation can act independently with strength and clarity without waiting for approval from the global elite. It reminded Muslim leaders and citizens alike that sovereignty means nothing if it's only used for ceremonial speeches and not for actual decisions that protect the dignity of your people. And as oil tankers halted and the world paused to reassess the balance of power, many in the Muslim world looked not with fear, but with admiration. They saw in Iran something many had long forgotten: a refusal to be bullied, a stance built not just on pride, but on principle. In regions where cooperation between Muslim countries has been reduced to photo ops and half-hearted resolutions, this moment felt real. It sparked debates in homes, masjids, universities, and parliaments. People began to ask the difficult questions: why do we remain quiet when others oppress our brothers and sisters? Why do we allow our resources to be controlled by outsiders? Why have we forgotten that unity isn't just a slogan? It's a responsibility. Iran's move wasn't calling for war, but it was calling for awakening. It exposed how low the bar had fallen for Muslim leadership and how rarely any nation stood without fear of consequence. As Muslim nations watched the global reaction to Iran's action, they witnessed something powerful: respect. Not from everyone and not always with admiration, but respect nonetheless. Iran had made itself impossible to ignore, and in doing so, it reminded others that power respects power, not passivity. The Muslim world began to reconsider the cost of silence and the value of self-respect. This wasn't about agreeing with every policy or strategy. It was about recognizing what it means when one of us dares to stand tall while surrounded by enemies. It was a wake-up call, a challenge, and an invitation. If one Muslim nation can demand attention without asking permission, maybe the others can remember what strength really looks like. Maybe this is the spark that reignites the forgotten fire, not to dominate, but to finally walk with dignity as a united Ummah. When the global media machine turned its spotlight on Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the story that unfolded across headlines and newsrooms was crafted less to inform and more to influence. Iran was immediately painted as the aggressor, the instigator, the rogue actor threatening peace. But those who truly understand the language of geopolitics knew better. This wasn't a spontaneous provocation. It was the boiling point of years of injustice. Yet, instead of investigating the causes, the media magnified the effects. Instead of analyzing the layers of provocation that led to this reaction, they fed the world a simplified narrative that framed Iran as the sole villain. This distortion of truth is not new. It has long been the tool used to maintain control over how the Muslim world is perceived. The painful reality that Muslims must confront is that the global media rarely tells their side of the story. It edits, it omits, and it spins. When a Muslim nation defends itself, it is called defiant. When it asserts its sovereignty, it is called a threat. When it refuses to bend the knee, it is labeled dangerous. This tactic has been used repeatedly, not just with Iran, but with Palestine, with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with Libya, with Syria. The world is trained to panic when a Muslim country acts with strength, and to ignore when that same country suffers in silence. Iran's decision to close the strait was not just an act of strategy, it was an act of exposure. It revealed not just geopolitical tensions, but the deep-rooted bias in global narratives. As news outlets around the world ran urgent headlines, oil prices spiked and politicians called for calm. There was no room in the conversation for Iran's justification. No space to speak of decades of sanctions, military threats, and economic warfare that led to this point. No context provided for the cycles of provocation and pressure that made such a drastic move inevitable. The message was clear. When a Muslim country disrupts the flow of comfort to the West, its reasons are irrelevant. Only the discomfort matters.